Greetings, car fanatics. Today I'm going to be showing you how to replace the brake pads and rotors on this 2012 Mercedes C250. However, this process should apply to pretty much any car.
Alright, to get the job done, first you're going to need some parts. I'm using some Brembo OEM equivalent rotors here, along with some Paget, also OEM equivalent brake pads. So the Paget pads actually come with additional hardware stuff. You have some additional clips and bolts, which is really convenient. You also need a brake pad wear sensor. So let's take a look at the tools you'll need to get the job done. You're going to need a couple of ratchets. In my case, I have a long ratchet here, which will serve as a breaker bar. You also need a breaker bar if you don't have a long ratchet. You're going to need a few sockets. There's a 13mm socket, a couple of 18mm sockets, a 17mm socket, and then a T30 socket. You're going to need a torque wrench. You're also going to need a set of locking pliers, a hammer, a screwdriver, and then this right here is for the brake calipers. You want to just use this to depress the pistons on the brake calipers. You also need a piece of string to tie up your brake calipers, and then you need a few compounds. I have some brake lube here, and I'll show you what to do with it, anti-seize, and some Loctite.
So you want to start by breaking loose the lug nuts on the wheels. Now lift up the car, and then secure it on jack stands to make sure your car is safely held up in the air. So I'm using these Mercedes jack pads to protect the jack points. Once you have them lined up, you want to lower the car carefully and make sure that you have both sides on jack stands.
Alright, the next thing you want to do is check your brake fluid level, because when you depress those brake caliper pistons, that's actually going to make your brake fluid rise in this reservoir. And if you're too full, it's actually going to spill out. In my case, I'm below the maximum amount, so I have enough room where when I push those calipers back, it wouldn't overflow. But if yours is at the max level, you probably want to take a little bit of the brake fluid out.
Alright, now let's go ahead and remove the wheel.
And just as a safety precaution here, you want to take that wheel when you're done and put it under the side of your vehicle. That way, if your jack stand fails, you have a redundancy that's going to keep you protected.
Start by turning the steering wheel all the way in the opposite direction of the side you'll be working on. This will give you better access to the brake caliper bolts. Now use needle nose locking pliers along with a 13mm socket to remove the brake caliper sliding pin bolts. This will allow you to move the brake caliper to change out the brake pads. Before removing the brake caliper, use a flathead screwdriver to pry out the brake pad sensor. And if you do this carefully, you can reuse the brake pad sensor, assuming you didn't trigger the brake pad indicator. Now take a string or a bungee cord and tie up the brake caliper to the suspension. This is going to prevent the brake caliper from hanging on the brake hose and damaging it. Now to access the brake rotors, we're going to have to remove the brake caliper bracket. Use a 18mm socket along with the breaker bar to break these loose. Now use a T30 bit to remove the retaining screw for the brake rotor. Once you have this off, if the brake rotor doesn't come off easily, go ahead and take a hammer and whack the corners until you can break the rotor loose.
Alright, and this is where you want to apply your Loctite to the hub over here, and this is just going to prevent the new brake rotor from sticking in the future.
Reinstall the brake rotor retaining screw. Just put a little bit of Loctite on it, and then when you torque it, just torque it snug. It doesn't have to be very tight. Now that we have the new brake rotor installed, let's go ahead and clean it with some rubbing alcohol. This is going to remove any residue from the factory as well as any contaminants you may have introduced during the install.
Now we can take off the brake pads and then pop off these clips right here. You definitely want to replace these, because if not, you could get some squealing.
So the nice thing about these Paget pads is that they also include these new brake pad clips. Reinstall the brake caliper mount and be sure to add medium strength thread locker to the brake caliper mount bolts.
Now we want to set the torque to 118 Newton meters. This is around 87 foot-pounds of torque. But let's go ahead and just get that setting dialed in here. Okay, now it's time to install the brake pad. We want to take our brake lube here and apply it to the back, and this is going to prevent it from squealing. Additionally, these brake pads do slide, so you want to make sure you're greasing where it slides. And before we can put this back on, we're going to have to spread this out. Alright, and this sensor is still good, so we can just push it right back into the brake pad. Now we're going to take our new bolts over here that came with the brake pads, and let's go ahead and put them in. And they already have the Loctite on them, so that's nice. Okay, now it's time to torque these to 25 Newton meters.
Alright, now we're ready to put the wheel back on. Go ahead and do that, and then reinstall the wheel bolts. You want to tighten these in a cross pattern, but don't go ahead and tighten them all the way yet. We'll torque it when the car is on the ground. Raise the car back up, and then remove the jack stands and lower the car back on the ground.
Alright, so the final step is just to torque down the wheel bolts. Just want to torque them to 96 foot-pounds. And you want to be sure to do it in a crisscross pattern to make sure your wheel is seated properly. And when you first drive the vehicle, press the brakes before you get on it, and then you want to take it easy for the first few hundred miles. As you can see here, there's a coating on the brake rotor that they put on to make sure it doesn't corrode. And your first few miles you drive, it's going to be really just taking off that coating, so your brakes aren't really going to have a lot of grip at first. And over the next couple hundred miles, as you drive the car, the brake pad material will start to transfer over to the brake rotor, and that's going to give you a better stopping surface. Well, there you have it, car fanatics. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Leave me comments or questions below, and if you're looking for more DIY content, take a look at www.ecarguides.com for more DIY content. Thanks for watching.